Great. Thanks, Manana. Yeah, so one of the things we want to do as we get into this is set the context for why we even started having this conversation. So as we've all been experiencing, the pandemic is causing folks to think a lot about their job, their location, where they live, thinking about their community and thinking about other places. And so there's a number of surveys you probably can find out there right now. We like the work that Upwork has done in looking at a survey of individuals, and basically what they've estimated is somewhere between 14 and 23 million people are estimated to be looking to move, and many of them already have. I mean, there's some other earlier data that was developed last year that showed around 7 million people had already moved. The question is going to be how many of those are permanent moves versus just a temporary getting out of town and getting to parents' house or someplace else to help watch their kids. So we're seeing a lot of that. I think we are seeing a lot of folks moving from larger cities. So San Francisco, Chicago, New York have all been significantly impacted by people moving out of them. And so you see some figures here. I think the number one reason that we're hearing from people why they're moving is because of looking for a more affordable housing location and as well as then quality of life. But I think so it's both this financial decision as well as this looking for a different kind of environment that's really driving people to think about what is really becoming a mass migration. And so we'll get into some of that more as we go through.
So hey everyone, I'm Chris Worley with Fourth Economy. Going to be talking about two key pieces of remote ready data and how they kind of integrate with a couple other data sets that Livability and Fourth Economy have put together over the years. So these two pieces of remote ready data that are so important are the remote workforce. Does your community have a presence of a remote workforce? For this, we look at workers who could work at home based off of a Bureau of Labor Statistics, job flexibilities, and work schedule data. This comes specifically from a question from a BLS survey that asks, as part of your main job, can you work at home? And we also know that remote work requires reliable high-speed internet. And to get an idea of broadband connectivity and internet speed for a typical user, we look at median download and upload speed data. This is from Google's Measurement Lab. And the data that we have here is from Q4 of 2020. We do know that before COVID-19, only about 3% of US workers teleworked on a regular basis. But recent surveys have pegged that as high as 25 or 33%. I've seen one that even said 40% at the height of the pandemic of US workers working remotely. And we know that COVID has forced employers to rethink their workers' ability to work from home. So when we look at the ability to work remotely, like I said, the Bureau of Labor Statistics completed a national survey. They estimate that around 29% of all US workers have the ability to work from home. This represents 42 million workers across the US. And in that survey, they found that industry and occupation mix determines the ability to work remotely. For instance, a worker in food and accommodation industry is much less likely to work remotely, while many in finance and insurance may have the ability to do so. Likewise, occupations like computer programmers or accountants are more likely to be able to work remotely than someone like a material mover or a fry cook. Looking at this map, areas that are shaded in light blue have lower concentrations of remote workers than those shaded in dark blue. We downscaled the BLS's national survey data and fit it to a model for each county in the US. And depending on industry and occupation mix of a community, the concentration of workers who are able to work remotely generally ranges from about 1 in 4 workers to 1 in 3 workers across the country. The next thing that we looked at was broadband infrastructure. Now there are several ways to get at this, but probably the most dependable that we've seen is what a typical user experience is. So if you've ever taken one of those internet speed tests, what's my download and upload speed? This is where this data is coming from. It's from Google M Labs, and this is millions and millions of these internet speed test data each and every month. So we know that download speed is the most important factor for online work. Download speed affects things like web browsing and how well your connection receives video from other people. We know that's so important with Zoom calls. Upload speed affects how well your connection can send your video stream to others or upload files. So we really broke these down into 4 different categories. The bottommost category here is just too slow for remote work. Those in that yellow category meet the work from home minimum. Both the greens are great. The light green there meets the definition from FCC of high-speed internet, and the dark green there means that 3 to 4 people in a household could reliably share that internet connection, which we know is so important given either multiple spouses working from home at the same time, or folks who have kids who are trying to do their homework while at the same time that they're working. So again, across the country, we know that internet speed varies. This map shows those 4 categories that we just talked about. Broadband deployment is especially difficult in rural areas, and that's showcased here on the map. All places that show up in the top 10 from Livability and Fourth Economy on our top 10 remote ready lists have either high-speed internet that meets the FCC definition or that next tier up, super high-speed internet. And when we look at all 3,000 counties in the US, we see that in that top tier, just over a third of counties for a typical user have that high speed or super high speed connection, but almost a third at the bottom, that 29% of counties, internet speed will not support remote work. So these are places that would need to make investments in broadband infrastructure to have an opportunity to recruit these remote workers that we're talking about. So let's take a look at what we did with combining this remote ready data with Fourth Economy Community Index and Livability Top 100 data. So like Rich said, the Fourth Economy Community Index incorporates 20 different indicators across the areas of investment, talent, sustainability, place, and diversity. And while we know that there is no single recipe for economic success, we also know that these 5 areas are critical ingredients in vibrant and equitable communities everywhere. The Livability Top 100 data is geared toward talent attraction and relocation efforts. Winona will talk about this more, but Livability bases their score on 8 categories, totaling 40 indicators, with weighting based on survey responses from 1,000 millennials about the factors that are most important to them when deciding where to live. And of course, we just talked about the remote ready data. So who makes the list? All of the top 10 have high concentrations of remote workers, high-speed internet access, and also score well across quality of place metrics. For the remote workforce, nearly 3 in 10 workers are able to work remotely. An estimated, in these 10 studies, an estimated 451,000 out of 1.5 million workers are able to work remotely. Like I said, all these places meet or exceed the FCC's definition for high-speed internet. And when we looked at the Fourth Economy Community Index and the livability indicators, these places are places that score high in quality of place, like cost of living, amount of home ownership, presence of cultural amenities, and they're also talent magnets. We know that these places have attracted those with high degrees of educational attainment, high wages, and high rates of resident retention. So to unveil the top 10, this list of top 10 really separated themselves from other places across the country because they appeared both in the top 10 lists of the Fourth Economy Community Index and the Livability Top 100. So Fourth Economy, our community index, has 3 top 10 lists based off of county size, so small, mid-size, and large places. Places that score highly in the community index are those that are vibrant and equitable. Livability has a top 100 list that focuses on the factors that are most important to millennials when deciding where to live. So we cross-reference these lists. These top 10 differentiated themselves by performing well on both those lists, as well as in broadband access, local jobs that can be done at home, affordability, a robust regional economy, and quality of life factors. So we're going to get to hear from several reps on this list later, but before we do, I want to pass the presentation to Winona.
Hi again, everyone. So today I am going to talk a little bit more in depth about what remote workers are looking for and what their priorities are right now as they're looking to relocate. I'm going to share with you some proprietary data that is hot off the presses from Livability. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the metrics that we use to define livability. And then we're going to go from there into the panel and the Q&A. So please keep popping those questions into the Q&A box down there. So first, I'd like to start by talking about livability. And by that, I mean the concept and the website that I run. So as I mentioned earlier, the annual ranking that we do, the top 100 best places to live in America list, is far and away our most popular and important piece of content that we do all year. It's kind of the joy, it's our pride and joy, and it's the bane of our existence because it's 3 to 6 months of every year. We're just completely knee deep in data and metrics and interviews and figuring out, who are going to be our like national writing staff and getting the photos. It's just a huge project. We love it and we hate it. And in 2020, our list was set to launch on April 7th. And I don't want to spend too much time in this flashback mode, but if we could all momentarily kind of bring ourselves back to April 7th, 2020, I think words that might come to mind for that time would be terror, panic, fear, confusion, uncertainty, just existential dread. Let's throw that in there. It was a very bad time, a very dark time, a very scary time. People were under quarantines, they were under lockdowns. This was not a time that people were thinking about, giddily discovering their next great place to live. It was spring of 2020 was not the time to release this list. So of course we hit pause on the list. And you can go to the next slide, Monica, thank you. Because we were really trying to grapple with, we were in a brand new world, like millions of people across the country. The Livability team had also switched to remote work basically overnight. We were trying to figure out, we have spent our careers and our year pinpointing what is a good place to live. And really, we pride ourselves on understanding the metrics and the priorities of relocators every year, and what is the definition of livability, and what sets a great place to live apart from a good place to live, all this stuff, right? All of a sudden, we found ourselves facing a new question. Is anywhere a good place to live right now? And for the majority of 2020, let me tell you, the answer felt like a hard no. Behind the scenes, we were, if you could go back for a second, Monica, sorry. Behind the scenes, we were kind of freaking out. We were struggling to figure out, do we need to throw out all of the data that we had already prepared for this list? Do we need to come up with brand new metrics? Because the world has changed so much, and so has, what people need and want out of a city. Did we need to throw out the 100 cities that we had prepared for the 2020 ranking and have a brand new list? Did we need to have no list at all and just wait for this crazy year to pass? And while we were kind of trying to figure that out and grappling with all these questions, something started to happen. First of all, we were looking at our search traffic. You can go to the next slide. Looking at our search traffic and noticing there was a lot of interest coming up in search terms like how to move during a pandemic, affordable places to live, small cities that are still cool, small cities with fast internet, all that kind of stuff. We're starting to see, things like that start trending. We're also seeing an increase in interest for content on livability that had to do with things like leaving a big city for a smaller city and kind of what all comes with that shift in lifestyle and location. We also saw a lot of interest in great cities with outdoor recreation or lots of space, and our content that focused on affordable places to live. And then, this one is extremely anecdotal, but I have to say my text messages were just blowing up at this time with people friends and friends of friends who were contacting me and saying, hey, I don't have to live in this city because my office is here anymore. Where should I move? And, to be honest, when you run a site about the best places to live, you do get a lot of texts like this throughout the year and any year, but I have to say this was off the charts. And as I was, having these conversations, digging into the research as new data was coming in throughout the year of truly how many people were both moving and thinking about moving and researching moving, as I was kind of interrogating these texters that were asking me about where they should live and saying, well, what's important to you? I realized something. Go ahead, Monica, thank you. Had a little bit of an epiphany. The world had changed. We were all living in a completely different reality than we had ever known or ever been familiar with, right? But the definition and the metrics of livability were exactly the same. When I was having these conversations, when I was digging into the research, when I was looking at search trends, people were still absolutely focused on the things that we had always been focused on to define livability. Things like affordability, quality education, quality healthcare, tight-knit communities, a diversity of housing, a diverse population, an inclusive culture, good transportation and infrastructure, a strong economy. All of this stuff was still absolutely top of mind. So people's, their moving priorities hadn't changed. The thing that had changed was that many, many, many more people now had the freedom to act on those priorities. We were seeing that people, these things had always been important to them, but maybe they weren't able to act on them because they were always tethered to a particular location because of their job. All of a sudden, we throw that out the window, and now these priorities get to drive the bus and drive their decisions. This is huge, huge for us. So kind of moral of this story is we published the top 100 actually with the same exact cities and metrics that we had assembled before the pandemic, because they actually were more applicable than ever. We ended up publishing it in October. It was very well received. I was very proud of it. But at the same time, living in this new world and dealing with all these new questions, I wanted to dig deeper into this phenomenon of remote work and kind of this newly mobile population that we were looking at. So Livability did our very favorite thing, which is we surveyed 1,000 people across the country to learn more about their relocation priorities and really dig into why are people moving, where are people moving, with a specific focus this year on remote workers. Today, I'm going to share with you the 5 key takeaways from this research and from this survey. So key takeaway number 1, affordability matters more than ever. And I have to tell you, we have been doing this research every year for the past 3 years. Affordability is always far and away the top consideration of people who are looking to relocate. That's the top of their list when they're deciding where to live is, can I afford it, right? This year was no different. In fact, affordability was even more top of mind for people. 78% of respondents ranked affordability in their top 3 deciding factors for relocation. They're really looking for a place where they can weather the economic turbulence that the pandemic has brought and kind of made us all aware of. They're also looking for a place where they're not just living paycheck to paycheck and having to spend all of their money on exorbitant rents, but they can really live a good, happy, full lifestyle. And what I like to also hit on when we talk about affordability, especially with city leaders and people who work in talent attraction and economic development, is affordability is it encompasses a lot more than median home price. Affordability is relative. If you are affordable compared to a competitor city or compared to a major metro near you, you can market yourself as affordable, and you should. It also it encompasses more than home prices in terms of things like if you have low tax rates, that's an affordability asset. If you have, in non-pandemic times, a really full, bustling kind of, calendar of local events and lots of fun things to do and parks and stuff. If people can live a really full life without spending a lot of money in your city, that's an affordability factor, right? If you have access to great educational institutions at maybe a lower price than other places, that's affordability. So get creative with how you're talking about how you are affordable, because people do care. And most cities, honestly, can kind of find an affordability angle to set themselves apart. The second takeaway from our research this year, this one I think is really surprising and a little bit counterintuitive. Job opportunities in your city matter to remote workers. So this one is interesting to me because I think a lot of city leaders are kind of viewing remote workers as, well, they'll just like pack up and bring their jobs with them and park it in my city and join our tax base and we're good to go. But that's not really what remote workers are. That's not how they're looking at these moves. And that's not what they want. They want to be engaged in a community and they want to live somewhere where they can see a path for their career to grow and they can feel and see that energy and opportunity. We found that 43% of millennial respondents cited local and future job opportunities as one of their top 3 priorities. That slipped slightly from last year, but only slightly, which is really interesting when we're talking about millions of more people being able to bring their jobs with them anywhere, right? An interesting other kind of aspect to this is that when we talk to people about what incentives were interesting to them, assistance finding a local job or anything that a city can do to kind of show that they're committed to helping your career grow here was really appealing, and remote workers are really looking for that. And speaking of incentives, let's talk about key takeaway number 3. So incentives alone aren't going to attract remote workers. If you were not on someone's radar before now, if you offer them a $100 Starbucks gift card to move to your city, they're probably not going to move there. I would, but most people wouldn't. The thing about incentives is if you were kind of in the mix or in the running in someone's mind as like, I'm going to either move to this place, or this place, incentives can definitely like get you across the finish line or help sway their decision. When we asked remote workers to talk to us about what incentives actually matter and which ones would actually maybe help you sway, make that decision, the ones that were most popular were probably predictably the ones that touched on affordability and tied into that. So the things that are offsetting their living expenses or their moving expenses. Things like rent and down payment assistance, tax breaks, cash incentives, those were all very appealing. The other thing though that I always like to bring into the discussion about incentives is just there's a lot of creative license you can take with kind of the definition of incentives and what incentives are interesting to people right now. Again, remote workers, they don't have the built-in community and network of coworkers in an office, right? They really, really want help engaging with their community, and they want to feel like the city that they're moving to is being proactive in helping them get engaged. So think about incentives that maybe help connect them, whether that's social networks or professional networks or upskilling or, maybe a discount on co-working spaces. There's a lot of versions of incentives that don't involve just writing someone a $10,000 check. And they actually might be more effective in kind of telling the story of your city and how much you want people there and how invested you are in getting them there and keeping them there. That's really important. So let's talk about key takeaway number 4 from our latest survey. We know that remote workers, they're willing to leave big cities. They are leaving big cities, but they also want easy access to big cities. When we kind of looked at the data year over year and compared what had changed based on the respondents from last year before the pandemic, et cetera, one of the biggest jumps was airport accessibility. So when we asked people, how important is it that you can fairly easily access an airport from wherever you're living, that doubled in popularity over last year. That tells us that, people, they're definitely willing to move to smaller cities, small towns, even rural areas, especially if they're remote workers. But they are anticipating at some point they're going to maybe have to get back to the office sometimes, or they want to be able to go visit family or just be able to kind of have that accessibility and mobility around the country. That's really important to them. So whether you're kind of well connected to other major cities via airport or via roads, just kind of figuring out a way or an angle to talk about your accessibility and connectivity is really appealing. Key takeaway number 5. This is pretty obvious probably to any of us who've been working in a small space with a work from home spouse or a couple kids who are doing virtual schooling, but people are really craving space. They're craving indoor spaces and outdoor spaces. When we asked people, have your housing needs changed since the pandemic, over half of people said their needs and priorities had changed. And the main thing they were looking for was more space. They're looking for, homes that have space for working from home, areas, home offices, home gyms, little, a space to do homeschooling, that kind of stuff. They're also looking for outdoor spaces, and they are looking for those in the form of, backyards. How many of us either lived in big cities or have friends in big cities who over the past year have said, I would kill to have a backyard right now? But beyond that, people are also really craving outdoor spaces, outdoor recreation, natural areas, open spaces. I have to tell you, we have a couple stories on livability that are just kind of basic cornerstone pieces about, why you should move to Montana and Wyoming. We do these for every state, but the Montana and Wyoming ones have these just gorgeous photos that are just these big, grand, open spaces and just endless skies, right? Whenever we post these on social media, they blow up. And I think people are just looking at these big open spaces and saying, what's happening there? I'm interested, because we're all just going stir crazy. So, if whether it's a park system that you're proud of or just easy access to natural areas, that is a huge selling point for remote workers right now and anyone who's looking to relocate. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of tying in the data that Chris talked about, the data that from Livability Survey and from our definitions of livability, and then how this all ties into our top 10 remote ready cities list, and kind of just themes that are coming up across the board when we're talking about what remote workers want and what makes a city remote ready. First and foremost, affordability is key. Remote workers, they're looking for a different pace of life. They're looking to, bring their job somewhere where they can get just more for their money. Like I said, get creative in how you define affordability as a marketer, as an economic developer, because residents are creative in how they define affordability. The other theme that is really interesting to me is just this idea of access, right? It's people want access to other cities, to the rest of the country, to kind of a freedom of movement. They want access to outdoor recreation. They also want access to city leadership in terms of being able to access people who are making decisions and kind of shaping the future of their city. They want access to leadership positions. They want a seat at the table. They also really want access to a really full, rich, vibrant life. And they don't want to compromise on that. And that's really cool in terms of that they're able to make these moves, and these cities are able to offer them something different that way. They're also craving, obviously, nature and open spaces is a huge selling point, and a lot of different variations, by the way. Small parks, big parks, national parks, state parks, backyards, all kinds of stuff that way. And then, like we touched on, this idea of local opportunities and growth, they want a place that's going to be a smart move for them career-wise, and they're not looking at themselves as sort of a little career island. They want to move somewhere that they sense that energy and opportunity and growth and connection and networking, all of that is very important to them. And next, I want to talk about, I have to say this picture kind of cracks me up because this guy is like a remote working icon. I don't know if he's wearing pants or not, and who among us? But I also talked to city leaders from the top 10 cities in the process of putting together this list, and just wanted to have conversations with them about, why, really getting down into the why. Why is your city so remote ready? Why is it so appealing to remote workers? What have you been doing behind the scenes to leverage that? And some themes arose from these conversations as well that I wanted to share with you today. The first one is these city leaders are future focused. None of them were kind of just leaning back and wanting to either maintain momentum or do what everyone else is doing. They're all looking to innovate. They're looking to push boundaries. They're looking to do something completely different and new, and invest in infrastructure in new ways, talk about culture and build culture in new ways. And they're also communicating that future focused mentality to prospective residents, and that's key. They're also being authentic about who they are. And by that, I mean, I think in terms of, in the economic development and place marketing world, a lot of us fall into this trap of saying, we have something for everyone here. And you might, but you actually probably don't. And that is 100% fine. And if you can be honest about that, about who you are, about what you have to offer that no one else has to offer, and also about your shortcomings and about your blind spots and about the things you're working on. That is so appealing to, especially as we all know, millennials are obsessed with authenticity. And a lot of remote workers are millennials. So if you can really be authentic about, you know, your good parts, your bad parts, the places you fall short, that's actually a selling point. These places are also speaking directly to remote workers. They are, you know, saying if you are working remotely and you can live anywhere, we want you to live here, and here's why. There's no one benefits from kind of trying to be vague about who you want and why you're a good place. Really speak to, if you want remote workers in your city, speak to them on your social media, at events, and hashtags. Really be very clear with them that you're excited about them and what you have to offer. And then finally, these cities all just have this great culture of welcoming and inclusiveness. They really genuinely want new residents, and they want to give them a seat at the table. And they want to include them in decisions and really say, like, we're growing, we want you to come grow with us, and we want you to help us grow in a thoughtful and, you know, unique way. And that's really resonating with remote workers. So now I would like to introduce a couple of our panelists and get into some Q&A and a little bit of panel discussion. So today on our panel, we have Melody Warnick, who is a journalist and author of an amazing book called This Is Where You Belong. And it is a book that is about finding home wherever you are and kind of how you can create that sense of belonging and ownership in any city. And the new book that she's working on is called Anywhereist, and it focuses on how people who can live anywhere choose where to live, which is awesome. We also have Kenny McDonald, who is the president and CEO of One Columbus, and Columbus is the #1 city on our list, our top 10 remote ready cities list this year, which is awesome. And then we have, did Michelle make it today?
She is here, and I'm working on moving her to be.
Awesome.
One moment. Sorry.
Okay. So Michelle is the VP of Marketing and Communications for the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and Sacramento was also on our top 10 remote ready cities list. So let's get into it. My first question, Kenny, is for you. As our #1 city, Columbus, or #1 remote ready city in the US, I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about what Columbus has to offer that's aligned with all of these things we talked about today, and how much of those things have been sort of conscious efforts on the part of city leadership, and how much of it is just kind of the, you know, the special sauce of the city that kind of exists on its own.
Well, first of all, thank you, Winona. Great research, and appreciate, continue to learn about how, this workforce is moving, and the facts and figures that Fourth Economy provides are really insightful. So, like always, we're seeking to learn. See a lot of great people attending this, and I'm a big believer that we're all passionate about the places that we're from. I'm paid to do that for Columbus, Ohio, though, and so I'll say a couple of things. When I moved here 10 years ago, and they had done a lot of brand work and a lot of work on who they were, and the two core values of the region were smart and open. And so, everything that we pursued over the last 10 years, all the economic development projects, all the smart cities initiatives, our approach to branding, to outreach, to talent, to companies, and everything else was around those two things. We not only we're open, but we love smart people. We love people that want to come and contribute their ideas. And we really embedded that. And I think that translated into some things that we built here. Maybe even decades before, with laying fiber and things like that, and making it a place where your ability to work from home or remotely, or in different settings, maybe even is a better way to say it, is really high here. The sort of the pandemic favored us when it came to March 12th of last year when we sent our people home from our office. I think we're getting close to our 1 year anniversary of that, which is kind of sad. And then I'll just give you a few things, a few facts and figures about Columbus. Columbus is a big city. It's the 14th largest city, and the new census puts us just the region itself is about 2.3 million, and the city itself is almost a million though. So it is a large city, but within 20 minutes you're living in suburbs or exurbs or even in rural settings. So the flexibility that the metro provides is pretty phenomenal. And then we think having a strong economy is a big advantage. I do think that there's some things that you mentioned that are going to hold true, certainly in the short term, and then may become even stronger as we move forward. People are going to want flexibility. They certainly were going to want the ability to work how they need to work right now, and then in the future, how they want to work. A mix of office or at home or in a third or fourth place around the community in small working spaces and stuff like that. And we're leaning into it, and we're learning every day about what that's going to mean. So again, thank you, and great to be part of the panel.
That's great, Kenny. Thank you. Melody, I would love to ask you, just in terms of, as you've been researching your new book and talking to a lot of remote workers and digital nomads, as you're talking to these people all across the country, what are they saying? What do they want? What are they interested in? Does it align with what we talked about here? Is there any other themes that have been emerging in your conversations?
Yeah, it does align. It's interesting because I talk to people who are moving or planning to move, and everyone has like an enormous spreadsheet and they're doing road trips around the country. And you hear really sort of quirky factors that matter to people. I've talked to people who have moved because they want to be in a warmer climate. I've talked to people who have moved because they want to be in a colder climate. That was just one person, I will say. But I think what it comes down to is, even if you're trying to be really practical, lifestyle matters more than anything. People really want to be in places that they feel like you said, Winona, they can live a full life, a rich life, a vibrant life. But it's a really emotional decision. I think what people are really looking for is a transformational experience. They, want to live their best life, and they're picking the place that they think will help them achieve that. The place that will help them become the kind of person that they want to be, the kind of person they imagine themselves to be. So it's not always as rational or as logical as you might expect. It really kind of comes down to these ineffable factors that probably people aren't even necessarily aware of themselves. So even when they talk about affordability, and that matters, and they talk about weather, and they talk about cultural amenities, the thing that might push one community ahead of another might be something they can't even explain to themselves. Just a little bit of love and feeling like this place is going to change them in some essential way.
I love that. As a data head and a kind of woo-woo feelings person, I love that combo. And I have to say, I've moved multiple places before wishing for transformation. And the worst is when you realize you're just still yourself. But
Right. And that usually is the reality. Places don't always change us, but they can change some pretty significant things about our lives. And that can, open up a window to become someone that we want to be. And so it's helpful for economic development people and city people to think about what, not just what we offer, but what do we represent? What do we offer symbolically to people who might consider moving to our town?
that's very powerful and very, very real. Michelle, I would love to talk to you about, out of all of the economic developers and city leaders I talked to, I thought your campaign targeting remote workers specifically was really creative and really well executed. And I would love for you to just share that experience and kind of how you went about targeting remote workers, talking to them, and what the results of that have been, and if you're happy with it.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on this panel discussion. So the Sacramento region is now the #1 location for people, according to Redfin, searching for homes in the country. And a part of this is the in-migration from the Bay Area and tech companies saying, hey, you guys can work remotely if it's in a 90-mile radius, go live wherever you want. So the Sacramento region has really taken advantage of this opportunity. So from a marketing perspective, we actually did a campaign called whatsnextoutwest.com, and we used 2 hashtags, NextOutWest and Rethink Remote, to attract these remote workers. And we did a video and actually interviewed people from the Bay Area who worked for a tech company and moved up here. And all the sound bites are raw. All of them are truly how they feel about our region. They are not scripted whatsoever. So we took a different approach to attract the millennial audience about what was really interesting and unique to them about the Sacramento region and why they loved living in our region and working here as well. So I think social media and video is so powerful, and it really differentiates you, from economic development groups throughout the country. I think economic development groups throughout the country, when I measure our success rate, I look at everyone's social media platforms, and I feel like a lot of them lack that. And if you are a millennial, that's what we care about. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're reading CNBC articles through our phone. That's how you really attract them. So we are targeting them through this video, through social media, and you can target millennials on Facebook through age demographics and geofencing locations. I mean, it's pretty nitty gritty in your targeting efforts. So that's kind of a little bit about what we did. And it's our Next Out West campaign.
I love it. And I would encourage everyone to check it out because the collateral and the pieces of media you created for that are just fantastic. Is there anything in terms of kind of lessons learned or tips for places that are trying to find that authentic voice to communicate with, with remote workers and millennials specifically that you would want to share?
Sure. I think that video is the most powerful tool and asset for economic developers who are really, trying to explain why you need to move your business or expand your business in your city or region. I was listening to a webinar, and it's not just fighting for jobs and investment in your city. You're fighting for talent and people. So the shift to remote working has really changed the game and made it so that you have to attract talent, right? When companies move, they want the talent. They want the best talent to hire. And so I think, cities could really do powerful videos and do them authentically and interview those millennials that live in your region and ask them why, what's the quirky things they love about their city. Sacramento has 265 sunny days of weather. We've got great breweries and restaurants, and we're the farm to fork capital. All the food is grown within, the Sacramento region on a national level in the Central Valley. So ask those people, what they think about living and working in your city.
Love it. So Melody, my next question is for you. In some of our conversations, I was really struck by this idea that you brought up, which is, we all know that millennials specifically have always wanted and expected more from their work. We want our work and our jobs and our workplaces to give us a sense of purpose, a community. We don't want to just get a paycheck and cash it and call it a day. That's not how we look at work. When you're looking then at remote workers who don't necessarily have a place of work or built-in coworkers, their place that they live becomes their place of work. And a lot of those expectations and needs kind of translate onto the place. I would love to have you talk a little bit about kind of what those expectations look like and how cities can maybe go about filling some of those needs for these remote workers.
Yeah, so that is my new theory that as people leave, physical workplaces, they're working less often in offices and more often at home or in co-working spaces, that your place becomes in essence your workplace, and the things that you maybe expect your work to provide, you might also start to get out of your community. So the Wharton researcher Adam Grant did a study with Facebook, and they surveyed all the Facebook employees around the world and asked them questions about, what they valued in their work. And it sort of came down to these three buckets. First was career. People want to feel like they're succeeding, that they're growing and developing in their work, that it's capitalizing on their strengths. They wanted community. So they wanted to feel like they were respected at work, but they also had connections. Maybe they were being mentored by bosses instead of just, told what to do. And the last was cause. So 3 C's. Cause means that people wanted a sense of meaning or purpose in their work. They wanted to feel like it aligned with their values. And as I think of those three categories, career, community, and cause, I think that places have a huge opportunity to offer those same things to people. Like looking at in the livability research, finding that even people who are remote workers wanted to be in communities that offered them potential job opportunities and maybe wanted to be connected to those. That's one example of ways that places can help people feel like they're still growing in their careers. Even if you're working from home, you might want to feel like you're part of an entrepreneurial community where people who have ideas can actually bring them to fruition, and that there are resources available to help them. Community is a huge factor for remote workers, because as people aren't working in offices, they get isolated and lonely. So people want to find ways to connect with their communities. Co-working spaces are kind of, an obvious one there that helps people feel like they're meeting people, but also creative communities, building communities of artists that help people feel a sense of energy around their work. And cause, I love what you said, Winona, about people want to feel like they have a seat at the table. They have a voice in their community. I think millennials especially, but also through all generations, having an impact in what you do every day is becoming increasingly important. And what better area to do that than where you live? So if places can find ways to open themselves up to newcomers and their good ideas, to find ways to integrate those people into local volunteer opportunities and boards, I love when cities offer micro grants to help people get, small creative ideas off the ground. Those are the kinds of things that make people feel really engaged in their place, the same way that an employer might want an employee to be engaged in their work.
That's such a good point. And on that point, I have one more quick question for Kenny before we maybe bring in a couple audience questions. Kenny, when we were talking, and I was just kind of asking you about sort of the paradigm of the leadership in Columbus and how you look at growth and kind of incorporating new residents. I just loved what you had to say about Columbus wants you here, and we want to hear your voice, and we want your opinions, and we don't care where you're from or what your background is. There's clearly a very collaborative and inclusive culture there. Could you speak a little bit about how important that is, or maybe any tips you have to kind of foster that in other places that are looking to foster that?
Well, first of all, I do think that you get fortunate. We're the home of Ohio State University. It's an urban university that sits in the middle of the city, with some 65,000 students on a regular basis that are on campus in the middle of the city, and all the worldwide faculty that live there as well. That breeds a certain amount of openness because of the people that it constantly brings to our community from around the world, and the ideas that they bring to how to make the community better and stuff. So that's a little bit in our DNA. And then we're blessed to have 17 Fortune 1000 companies sort of surrounding all of that. That are from the fashion industry. This is the headquarters of Abercrombie and L Brands and DSW shoes and all these companies from the fashion industry and stuff. There's a really interesting mix of people here, so it's become part of our culture. What we try to do intentionally to foster that even further is to organize that, to have our business community, our academic community highly organized and aligned around what we have stated as our vision, which is to be the most prosperous place in the country. We certainly want to grow. We think that's a precursor to a lot of good things, but we want to close gaps at the same time. And we saw those laid bare as all of us as we went through the course of the pandemic, the wealth and health and education gaps that became even more important. The gaps in broadband, even in a place like Columbus that has terrific access, but not everywhere, and it isn't affordable for everyone. We get really excited about solving those problems as a community, and again, it's towards a vision, it's toward a greater purpose that we talk a lot about, and we try to open our meetings with it. We try to keep it on the front page. Whether they're good things or bad things, I think that gives people a reason to say we're here to make it better, and we think it's pretty great right now, and it keeps everybody moving forward and like you said, future oriented.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you all. That was great. I could talk to you for many more hours, but I won't. Monica, do you have any questions for the last couple minutes?
Yeah, we have some great questions. Hopefully, lots of them were answered via typing. So just a little housekeeping. We'll be sending out a follow-up email, so you'll have access to this webinar. Any questions that others asked, we'll post the answers to, and there will be more content that we're sharing your way. So hopefully that will all be helpful. But before we go, this question is from Allison Treaster. Can you talk about what any of the top 10 cities are doing to incentivize talent to relocate? So any of you are welcome to answer that one.
We're not doing anything directly, so I've read about some of those programs. We are, we're leading with the message. We're staying aggressive with employers. We're working more closely with our own employers and their HR departments and their recruiting staff to make sure that message is really clear, consistent, and up to date. Even out of market search firms, making sure that they have the right data, up to date information, stuff like that on the Columbus market. But we haven't gone down the road of providing an incentive directly to outside people. I will say we're fortunate that we gain about 50,000 new people a year into the Columbus market, not all into the city, but in our metro area. And so, in fact, we're working on housing and all kinds of issues that are getting our housing market has gone crazy over the last year. So there's things like that have made the last year interesting, but we're not doing anything directly in terms of financial payments or anything.
Michelle, or Melody, do you have any insight?
Yeah, our region is not offering any incentives, but just continuing our message of why it's a great place to live and work here. I think millennials personally, I know Tulsa remote did it, and I know a couple other cities across the country did it. But I think that if you're a millennial, you're going to move to the place where you want to live and work. If someone's going to offer me a small incentive to move there, it's probably not going to make me want to move my family and my children. So that would be my advice, is kind of sell the offerings you have rather than incentivize. We did start a digital upskill program helping people get IT certificates with the CARES Act funding. So that is an incentive that people who lost their jobs due to COVID, we made sure there was a workforce development program for jobs of the future and digital jobs. Our region did offer something like that to students, but we did not incentivize people to move here. We have, like Kenny mentioned, we have a housing shortage. We need more houses, and we are getting a large influx of people to our region.
Yeah. It seems to me like, to circle back to that, the authenticity piece, like that may be even more powerful than an incentive in this situation. All right, well, it is 3 o'clock, so that flew by. Thank you all panelists for joining us. This was super interesting. I hope you all learned a lot. And I just want to let you know that we will be sending up a follow-up email and encourage you, if you have questions or want to talk strategy with any of us, you can contact us at any point, and we're happy to, talk through your ideas and help you get more remote workers.
Please don't hesitate to reach out. And we also, Livability is releasing a white paper with a ton more detail on the findings I just touched on today. And we'll be sending that out to all the participants in the next week or two. So, but get in touch if you have any specific questions. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah,
All
thank you,
right.
Kenny and Michelle, for winning and joining us, and also thank you, Melody, for joining us on the webinar as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
We're still recording.
I just stopped it.